Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 3rd annual HateWatchers Awards. And now, your host for the evening, Mr. HateWatcher. Welcome one and all to our year-end recap of the worst shows and movies of 2024, known as the HateWatchers Awards. The end of the year is always a great time to reflect on everything we've been through over the last 12 months. And in a year defined by burgeoning wars across the globe, political punditry, and, well, a whole bunch of weird things, it's important to remind ourselves of some of the steaming dog shit Hollywood dropped on our laps. Tonight we have 10 wonderful, but unwelcome awards, reserved for only the worst, most deserving shows and movies of 2024. And while there will always be some unheard of film that disappointed 5 people in a theater somewhere in Nova Scotia, we like to hand out our awards to those shows and movies that reached and disappointed millions of eyeballs, carved out a spot in the public discourse, and especially those shows and movies that we covered here on HateWatchers. So while something like this is certainly deserving of some nominations, the integrity of the HateWatchers committee won't allow us to nominate things we haven't watched. Lastly, it goes without saying, but here's your final spoiler warning of 2024. And now, with that out of the way, everyone please take your seats as the ceremony is about to begin. We begin this esteemed night with one of our most fun awards. Because this year, we're bringing back a fan favorite award with the category of Crappiest Dialogue. The Rings of Power took home this honor in our first ever HateWatchers Awards, but even the disastrous second season of that show couldn't compete with this year's nominees. Our first nominee, MegaFLOPolis, felt more like a fever dream than a movie. And no fever dream is complete without everyone saying a ton of bizarre shit.
You're anal as hell. I, on the other hand, am oral as hell.
What do you think of this boner I got? You Wall Street slut. This is your closing bell.
Next up, The Acolyte secures its first nomination of the night, after its amateurish, crappy dialogue was just the shit-covered cherry on top of everything else this show did wrong.
Can't believe my sister shed ice scum. And his strength in the Force is very powerful.
You think that his strength, that's your strength in the Force, Osha.
Our last nominee is Madam Web. While there were less off-the-wall baddie quotes or cringe-inducing lines in Madam Web, a metric ton of the dialogue in this movie is just explaining what is happening and why, as it zips along to its next plot point. It's essentially a 2-hour exposition dump in a movie that would rather tell you what's going on than show you. And now, the award for Crappiest Dialogue goes to The Acolyte. The Acolyte secures an early win tonight, and they'll be hoping not to take home any more awards. But while all of the nominees deserve recognition for being in the running for this award, none could hold a candle to the shit that regularly spewed forth from the characters of the Acolyte. And it was clear early on that the Acolyte was a shoo-in for the Crappiest Dialogue Award.
You may be their mother, but you are also our leader.
Right now I choose mother.
The power of many.
Let my sister go and I will train with you. Are you sure?
And you give. You give.
The Jedi are bad.
The Jedi are good. What have you done? What have you done? What have you done?
This next award is purposefully the second one we're handing out this evening, because it's the award for the worst second season. This award is special to me, because tonight's 3 nominees were among the first shows I reviewed on this channel. So it's heartwarming to watch these shows grow before my very eyes. Grow into something terrible, of course. First up, House of the Dragon Season 2 makes the list, as its second season was a major letdown after Season 1 made quite a splash. But Season 2 was often slow and boring. It had a serious dearth of major set pieces, and it featured just enough changes from the book to become concerning. But that's all to be expected when the events of this entire second season came from a mere 20 or so pages from the book. Halo Season 2 earns the next nomination in this category. The show maintained its current off-course trajectory in veering far away from the established lore. It spent entirely too long on extraneous subplots following irrelevant characters. And the main character, Master Chief, spent another full season being unrecognizable, completely embracing this knockoff Master Chief's role. In the end, Season 2 was atrocious enough to warrant the show's premature cancellation. Securing the last spot is Season 2 of The Rings of Power, a show that is no stranger to the HateWatchers Awards. Its sophomore outing continued to bastardize Tolkien's work, massacre fan-favorite characters from the lore, and somehow managed to give us even more disconnected storylines this time around, a problem that plagued the show in its first season. We have 3 strong contenders, but only one can win. And so, the winner of the award for the worst second season is... The Rings of Power. Halo Season 2 ran a close race, but in the end, the sheer amount of money being blown on the Rings of Power and the fact that it hails from a more widely beloved, more storied franchise helped it edge out the rest of the field. This next award is a brand new category this year, and it's only fitting that it's the award for the show or movie most likely written by AI. Our first nomination goes to Borderlands. Even though it took more than a decade for the Borderlands movie to come to fruition, the end product was still the exact kind of soulless video game franchise cash grab that many expected. Its bizarre casting choices, its bland villain, and the lack of banter that humans would consider witty makes us suspect that much of this movie was generated by artificial intelligence. The next nominee, ironically, is Atlas, a movie where the main antagonist is an artificial intelligence. And as if using an AI villain wasn't hitting on enough buzzwords, that villain's ultimate motivation for its power grab is that humans are bad because of climate change and pollution. There was also a robot with pronouns, but the cherry on top was the AI responsible for this script choosing J-Lo to star in a buddy action flick that doubles as a prolonged robotherapy session. Grabbing the last nomination is Roadhouse. This laughable reboot of the 1989 film that itself wasn't that popular makes us question if human hands wrote it thanks to how it was able to stretch out its ultra-simplistic plot for 2 hours, which usually boiled down to scenes where the script just says, and then they fist fight for 8.5 minutes. What truly confirmed our suspicions, however, is that only an AI would cast Post Malone as a bare-knuckle brawler and throw in a butt-naked Conor McGregor twice. And now, the winner of the award for most likely written by AI is... Atlas. What really secured this win for Atlas is that the ultimate lesson in the movie is that J-Lo learns that her AI buddy was great and she just needs more AI in her life, which sounds like AI-generated propaganda to me. Next up, it's time to honor the show or movie that made the biggest splash this year, just in the worst way possible, with the biggest flop award. For our first nominee, The Acolyte had a more impactful flop than nearly any show or movie. This show was dead on arrival thanks to the brain-dead comments of its creator ahead of its release, and the inability of anyone making or starring in the show to accept valid criticism of the series made The Acolyte a lightning rod for controversy. YouTube videos dunking on The Acolyte got far more views than the actual show did, and the aftermath was at least $180 million down the tube, an early cancellation of the show, and a further accelerated downfall of a once beloved franchise. Next up, Joker Folie à Deux was a complete bust in comparison to its billion-dollar predecessor. While this shitty sing-songy sequel eventually recouped its production budget, its opening box office only brought in $37 million domestically against its $200 million budget. A ridiculous figure when you take into account that that number is more than 3 times the budget of the smash hit first movie. Pulling up the rear in more ways than one is MegaFLOPolis. Francis Ford Coppola's fever dream pet project opened up to an abysmal $4 million domestically. And stacked up against the $135 million budget, the current total of $13 million in revenue is laughably low. Making matters worse, the filmmaker self-financed the entire production and marketing budget himself, even selling half of his winemaking business to do so, staking a lot of his money and his reputation on this movie. And so, the winner of the 2024 HateWatchers Award for Biggest Flop is... MegaFLOPolis. This movie was dubbed MegaFLOPolis for a reason, and the numbers speak for themselves. Our next award goes to the lamest villain that this year's slate of shows and movies gave us. Madam Web secures another nomination, this time for its impressively forgettable main antagonist whose name I had to look up. His name is Ezekiel, for anyone else who was drawing a blank. Ezekiel was just a generic spider guy whose motivations for going after our heroes, if you can call them that, stem from nothing more than a bad dream he had. Atlas gets its second nomination as well, as its villain, Harlan the AI, is more a product of this movie trying to pick up on a trending topic, rather than someone, or some machine, trying to write a compelling villain. Making matters worse, J-Lo, the 50-year-old teenager at the heart of this movie, discovers the key to beating Harlan is to do what he won't expect. Something that no other military leader ever thought of before. Picking up the last nomination in this category is, ironically, Atlas, the lame villain featured in Borderlands. Atlas is really just a guy in a long coat, who inexplicably has an army of faceless, nameless raiders at his back, and his motivation is nothing more than he wants something that he doesn't have, and the protagonists stand in the way of him getting it. I would go into more detail about this villain if it weren't for the fact that the Borderlands movie itself didn't offer anything more than that. So with that, it's time to hand out the award for the lamest villain. And the winner is... the bad guy from Madam Web. Making matters worse for this generic spider guy was his death. Madam Web doesn't feature some climactic fight between Ezekiel and the spider gals. They simply run away from him while he gets pelted by some conveniently placed fireworks that eventually kill him for them. Speaking of lame villains and Ezekiel's lame death, it's only fitting that we hand out the Lamest Death award next. With so many lame villains popping up in shows and movies this year, it was inevitable that some of them would experience equally lame deaths. And this prize seeks to honor and commemorate the lamest death we saw this year. Gladiator 2 grabs its first nomination of the night with the death of Macrinus. While Denzel Washington's character was one of the few bright spots in the Gladiator sequel, his death at Lucius's hands after repeatedly jackhammering Lucius's literal plot armor with no effect was a laugh-out-loud moment that cemented Gladiator 2 as a middling sequel. The second nomination goes to Atlas, Borderlands' forgettable foe. His death was as lame as he was. After getting close enough to touch the treasure he's long sought, he loses a fist fight to a 12-year-old girl before he gets dragged away by a tentacled hentai monster. Lastly, Joker Folie à Deux snags its second nomination of the evening. After everything Arthur Fleck went through in this movie and the first, he meets his end in a lonely, dark, dank hallway at the hands of another crazed inmate. It's an inglorious end to a character and a film series that was once captivating. And the winner of the award for Lamest Death is... Macrinus from Gladiator 2. Further undercutting Macrinus' death, beyond just the silly nature in which it happened, is that his death in a duel with a hardened warrior completely belied his nature as somebody who used his wealth and influence in the shadows, manipulating his way onto the throne. Our next award goes to the worst sequel or reboot, as we seek to honor the movie that decided to take an existing film and find ways to make it worse. Few movies this year received more criticism than The Crow reboot, but it was certainly deserving. Not only did The Crow spend the entire first half of the movie showing us the vomit-inducing love story of two dipshit losers, but it also changed Eric Draven's motivation from the incredible story of revenge in the original to one where this new Eric Draven has to save his fiancée, completely rewriting the story and giving us a definitively worse version. But even worse than that was changing The Crow from his original goth rocker persona to one of a struggling SoundCloud rapper. The next nomination goes to Roadhouse. This uninspired reboot of a movie that already wasn't overly popular itself somehow managed to turn in an even less popular film. Of course, having Jake Gyllenhaal, one of Hollywood's least famous movie stars, go up against an angry leprechaun isn't exactly a recipe for success. And the last nomination goes to Joker Folie à Deux. After the original Joker became a smash hit, they decided that the only thing that was missing was Lady Gaga in 45 minutes of singing. Need I say anything more? And the award for the worst sequel or reboot goes to... Joker Folie à Deux. Joker gets its first win with its third nomination. And it certainly deserves this win after this sequel felt like it purposefully set out to kill the series and its main character, just to spite the people who dared to enjoy the first movie. Next up is the Farthest Up Its Own Ass Award, an award reserved for the show or movie that went the farthest up its own ass and came out smelling like shit. The first nomination goes to Season 4 of The Boys. Not only has The Boys steadily devolved into merely a vessel to push the creators' politics, to the point that the story and its characters' arcs suffered immensely, but the show is also often literally up its own ass, with each successive season featuring increasingly perverse content dreamed up in the minds of truly sick people. Rebel Moon Part 2 snags the second nomination in this category after the second installment of Zack Snyder's self-indulgent IP that he and he alone thinks is cool found entirely new ways to disappoint viewers. The whole thing had this suffocating air of self-importance, and that, along with Snyder's meme-worthy overuse of slow motion and lens flare, made Part 2 hard to watch. And MegaFLOPolis secures its third nomination tonight. Coppola's pet project attempted to drape itself in the trappings of an extravagant, thought-provoking exploration of the underpinnings of empire collapse and societal degradation. But the unique vision of his world and all the hollow, pseudo-philosophical quotes in the universe mean nothing when you fail to even bother exploring the ideas you introduce, or even present a coherent story. MegaFLOPolis was farther up its own ass than this arrow went up Shia LaBeouf's ass. And now, the winner of the Farthest Up Its Own Ass Award is... Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar Giver. Zack Snyder is the only person on Earth that's obsessed with Rebel Moon, and it shows. And his cringy obsession with his own verse finally wins him a real award, the Farthest Up Its Own Ass Award. Our penultimate feature award for the night is the Strongest and Independentest Award. This honor is bestowed upon the show or movie that worked the hardest in trying to portray its female characters in the most strongestest and the independentest light possible. Getting the first nomination is Echo. This Marvel Disney Plus spin-off of a spin-off came out in the second week of January, so let me remind you of some of what its main character, Maya Lopez, had going on. Maya was the diverse, deaf, mute, woman of color, kick-ass amputee imbued with the magical powers of her divine female native ancestors at the heart of Echo, a show which clearly took representation and inclusion to the next level. Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim gets the next nomination. As if The Lord of the Rings hadn't taken enough hits this year with the second season of Rings of Power, this animated film wanted to introduce a new Slay Queen in Loder lore, Hera. Not content with being a princess of Rohan, Hera makes it clear that she won't marry no man.
I am bride to no man!
And all she wants to do is ride horses and chew tobacco and kick ass. And True Detective Night Country picks up the last nomination. Navarro's character, who was clearly based on Troy Polamalu, is an easy target to point at when nominating Night Country for this award. But what truly earned this show this nomination was the revenge of the indigenous cleaning ladies in the finale. Without further ado, the Strongest and Independentest Award goes to... True Detective Night Country. Every nominee for this award is worthy of recognition. But we all laughed too hard when the cleaning ladies struck back, as Night Country shit the bed in the finale harder than Amber Turd. Before we hand out our final accolade of the evening, we wanted to take a moment to recognize some of the shows or movies that were able to shine through all of the crap given to us this year, with the Most Pleasant Surprise Award. So with that, here are your nominees. The first spot goes to the Fallout series. Most people emerged into the Fallout series with a ton of trepidation, concerned that this video game adaptation with a female lead would get everything wrong like so many of its predecessors. But Fallout was shockingly good, putting people's concerns at bay, uniting casual and hardcore fans alike, and drawing new people into the franchise. The Penguin deservedly grabs the next spot. This tale, set in Gotham's criminal underworld, kept up an incredible pace and satisfied viewers from beginning to end. And the two great performances at the head of this refreshingly serious comic book superhero spin-off series left everyone wanting more. And the comedy Ted grabs the last nomination. I, like many, had little to no expectations from a cheap TV show based on a movie series that was dormant and, honestly a bit stale. But Ted surprised us all with its wicked funny first season. And now, the winner of the Most Pleasant Surprise Award is... Fallout. While I would personally rate The Penguin higher than Fallout, the operative word here is surprise. I fully expected The Penguin to be good, and it was great. But Fallout? Fallout was a massively pleasant surprise, so it goes home tonight with some hardware. And lastly, we close our night of unwanted recognition with the most important distinction we have to give, the award for the worst writing of 2024. Many of the shows and movies that earned nominations tonight were in the running for this award. But there can only be 3. The first nominee for worst writing is Rebel Moon Part 2. Zack Snyder apparently wrote the script for Rebel Moon when he was 10. And based on the 2 movies we got, it looks like he never revisited those scribbled crayon-written scripts in the years since. But I can't even imagine a 10-year-old finding an epic battle over space grain interesting. And yet, after 4 unbearable hours of Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon, the entire story boiled down to a fight between less than 100 people over the amount of grain that a village of 50 produces. And this amount of grain is somehow important to the survival of the galaxy-spanning Imperium. Add on top of that nonsense a complete lack of tension, a full roster of undeveloped characters, and blatant rip-offs of a litany of other IPs, and Rebel Moon Part 2 more than earns this nomination. Securing the second nomination is The Acolyte. Where to even begin? The Acolyte was loaded with utter nonsense, contrivances, incessant hand-holding, and bafflingly awful dialogue. Character motivations changed on a dime. May and Osha had more flip-flops than a beach on the 4th of July, sometimes going from dark side to light and back to dark in the course of an afternoon. And the Jedi went out of their way to not report the existence of the Sith. It's almost an impressive feat just how much this show got wrong in terms of its writing. And Madam Web gets the last nomination of the night, which is only fitting as this is my pick for the worst movie of the year. Basing this movie on an obscure comic book character that they didn't even try and make interesting wasn't enough. They needed to round out this film with a lame villain who has an equally lame death. And there's also no clear reason why any of this story is even happening. But the best, worst, and funniest part of the movie for me happened at the end, when the now blind Madam Web is shown to be inexplicably in a wheelchair. Add all this together, and Madam Web felt like a parody of a superhero movie. And with that, our final and least coveted award, the award for the worst writing of 2024, goes to... The Acolyte. The Acolyte had so many problems that tonight we've only really scratched the surface of them all. But at the core of almost all of its problems is its awful writing. No major characters throughout the entirety of this first and only season acted in a consistent or logical manner, or even like a believable human. You couldn't go 3 minutes without hearing more eye-rolling dialogue, and what the Acolyte did to the Star Wars lore was unforgivable. Overall, it was a bad story, awfully told, that failed to even deliver a meaningful message. But at least the show was canceled pretty much as soon as the ending credits rolled. So Leslie Headland, Kathleen Kennedy, Amanda Lestenberg, you can all take this award and fuck off forever. And with that, we tie the bow on the worst shows and movies of 2024. Before we leave you for the night, let's take one more moment to recognize the winners and ultimately losers of the evening. The Acolyte was the biggest loser of the night, taking home 2 awards on 3 nominations, Crappiest Dialogue and Worst Writing. With this triumphant defeat, The Acolyte cements its legacy as the worst show or movie of 2024. Rebel Moon, with its win of the Farthest Up Its Own Ass award, becomes the first show or movie in the history of the HateWatchers Awards to win an award in 2 consecutive shows, after having taken home the 2023 award for Least Developed Characters. And you just knew that the Rings of Power wouldn't leave empty-handed tonight, winning the worst second season accolade. But the Rings of Power only grabbed 1 win on 1 nomination, which is disappointing given their 2-win, 4-nomination showing in 2022. But I'm sure Season 3 will find the show right back in contention at the HateWatchers Awards. Halo Season 2, however, was a surprising snub at this year's ceremony, escaping unscathed. But if there had been an award for the most damaging to the franchise this year, I think it would have walked away a winner. I mean a loser. There was also a surprising amount of parody in this year's ceremony, largely due to the sheer volume of crappy shows and movies served up this year. No single entrant ran away with the nominations. The Acolyte, MegaFLOPolis, Madam Web, Joker, and Borderlands all topped the field with 3 nominations each. Before you go, I just wanted to thank each and every one of you for joining me this year as we hate-watched our way through 2024. Hollywood doesn't seem to be slowing down on churning out hate-watchable material, and I've thoroughly enjoyed breaking it all down and having some fun at Hollywood's expense with all of you. And I hope that you've been able to enjoy some of it as well. Lastly, 2025 promises to bring us plenty more material, so join us back here at Hate Watchers in the new year. What are your thoughts on the awards handed out tonight? Any glaring snubs? Any awards that you wholeheartedly agree with? Any recommendations for new awards next year? Is your list of winners entirely different from our committee's list? If so, you can email your list to trashbin@hatewatchers.gov. As always, remember to like the video if you liked it, and subscribe to Hate Watchers for reviews of current shows and movies. Thank you for bringing a little sanity to a crazy year with us today. Happy New Year, and we'll catch you in the next one.